I was not attempting to get to that question of what PewDiePie was doing. I'm not attempting to ask questions about what the religion inherent does. Nor am I attempting to evangelize, which is the question that we had in the last group. And like, essentially, you come to evangelize a position, which is to engage in a transformative experience. Yeah. Whereas the group is intended as an educational experience, you transform yourself. Yeah. Like, and that's kind of, and that's the difference in pastoring. And I don't want to be a pastor too, so I don't even want to engage in that evangelistic role. I mean, I would approach that with fear and trembling, shall we say. So, which is interesting because I don't mind engaging in a transformative role in the counseling, but also I'm trained at that, you know? So I know what I'm doing there. I don't know what I would be doing if I was trying to step into or step on the toes of a pastor. You know, I don't feel like I would do well at it. It's not my role in the body. I think I got towards cracking the demarcation problem. Okay. By comparing, okay, so to clearly articulate it, as we said, is like, my concern is about iatrogenic problems. And if there was an audience, good luck, but anyway, if there's an audience, to define what I'm talking about here. Doctors may give some patient that they are treating for one illness and successfully treating for that illness some other kind of illness, such as an infection because the hospital isn't clean enough or whatever. And so you would call that an iatrogenic problem, that it's generated by the doctoring profession. Because there are iatrogenic problems, and maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, but whatever. This is what happens when you only read things. Because there are iatrogenic problems doesn't mean we get rid of doctors. Obviously, you know, the cost-benefit analysis is still better in the favor of doctors. So that is true for other professions as well, and other professions can also generate some kind of illness, malformations based on whatever kinds of errors they may create. And so part of the reason I was asking a question of demarcation, which means dividing the space between, philosophy, theology, pastoring, and what I would say counseling, but philosophy and psychology being, you know, kind of on that side there. But yeah, maybe that should be a 5 circle. But anyway, rather than a 4 square. The point, though, is I was thinking about Buddhism generally, and and coming up with a comparative conceptualization for. It's actually by the PewDiePie video. PewDiePie reminded me. Yeah, it's got me thinking about that, and got me thinking that Buddha didn't write, or well, I mean, obviously we have like transcriptions, memorized transcriptions. But the transcriptions, the things that were transcribed in the way that he was attempting to engage with this audience was not for the sake of creating a holistic system, right? Like we think of in Western philosophy. Mm-hmm. But also, that's the exact same thing that we have with Jesus. And this is what I was saying that's interesting about Jesus' discussion in the New Testament. He could have written a book of philosophy. I mean, he's probably speaking 3 languages, Aramaic, Greek, and Hebrew. And there was the technology to write, transcribe, and pass on to future generations a book of philosophy. He could have done that himself. That wasn't his intention, and neither was that the Buddhist intention. And so I think this is actually the demarcation line between what I would say religion and philosophy, in that Buddha's intention and Jesus' intention were both to be, that's okay. So, but Jesus' intention and the Buddhist intention were both to be transformative. Mm-hmm. And so it puts me in mind of, I think, Karl Popper, but something about the nature of, in one of the philosophy of science things that I had looked at was the nature of like our inability to predict what an actual transformative experience is not something we can look at the cost-benefit analysis of, because our judgments of the thing will be different on the other side of the transformative experience, right? Mm-hmm. So I can't judge if I have a religious conversion or some other experience. I can't really judge from my individual initial position what I will be, whether this is worth doing. Or being a parent is a better example. Like, I can choose to have a child, and I can make some assumptions based on what I think being a parent would be. But until I am a parent, I am not in that position. And also, the act of parenting changes the values that I'm using to assess the situation. So someone may be like, no, I don't want to I don't want to have a kid, I got pregnant, but I guess I'll have it anyway. And then they change, this is the best mistake ever made, kind of, that kind of, like, because the transformative process is not something we can actually engage until we are transformed. So, but this is the nature, I think, of a religious experience. So, and the intention of both the Buddha and of Jesus is a transformative process. So this would give me at least one quadrant of that foursquare, because the question would be, what is the nature of pastoring, right? So the nature of pastoring is to invite people to a transformative experience, right?
How's that different from counseling?
Exactly. And then also, that ends up being the inroad, and this is actually why I wanted to have this kind of in discussion, because I'm sure you're going to think about things that I'll miss or whatnot. But as this is a very new idea, literally had it 3 hours ago in the shower. As this is a new conceptualization, what?
But also, that's also the purpose of philosophy, though, because like if
that's okay. But is it though? So I would say the purpose of philosophy is to come up with a specific conceptualization that we may then apply.
I was going to say, but what's the purpose of philosophy if it isn't applied?
Well, that's true. Is philosophy applied, or is philosophy? Philosophy is like a pure science, the exploration of the thing for itself, right?
Okay, but philosophy kind of latched on and decided that it would kind of adopt science, but that wasn't always the case.
I know what you're saying, because of course everything was philosophy at some point. Like science was philosophy.
But like, if we're going back to PewDiePie, and he was talking about Aristotle and eudaimonia, like that has nothing to do with science. So at one point, it
does if you make psychology into a science.
Okay, but like there were plenty of time, like, and even the Stoics, like when we're talking about that too, like there's no scientific.
Don't sleep on Epictetus. I'm thinking of which I got his book behind you. But anyway, it's literally right sitting up there. Anyway, whatever.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
But there were hundreds and hundreds of years where before I feel like philosophy decided that it would kind of adopt science. So
is that really because I would say science was birthed out of philosophy and specifically Aristotle, but out of a scientific logical method. Sure. Well, let's say there's the Platonic method of logical reasoning that then we attempt to derive truths about reality, or the Aristotelian method, which is the scientific method of let's test these things and then derive thoughts from the testing.
But I feel like there was a point at which philosophy became strictly scientific.
Strictly scientific.
Well, I don't even know.
Well, I mean, if you're talking structuralists, or that's an attempt, but I think it was a failure from the get-go.
But, I mean...
I don't, just for the audience's sake, I don't privilege science in epistemology to begin with, right? And then also, I am not going to give, let's say, synthetic a priori reasoning the grounding of science either. I mean, like if I'm going to demarcate, if I'm going to set aside a place for science, I'm not going to say the synthetic a priori is science because I want it to be practically enacted and tested, right? And so the testing, Karl Popper, thing of falsifiability being the point, there needs to be some version of enacted ideas, which would also, I mean, going back to the demarcation thing here, that's also the pastoring and counseling as enacted, transformative, testable-ish kinds of applications of the theological and the philosophic, or I would, in this I'm speaking broadly of philosophy as love of wisdom and including counseling in there, and also I kind of feel like post-Wittgenstein, psychology is the only philosophy really going anymore. I mean, like, I think the rest just shot itself in the head.
But also, if philosophy isn't applied, what is the purpose?
Well, pure research. I mean, like, that'd be the same thing as, like, a pure research science may be like, let's just... Strictly
theoretical.
Yes,
like,
let's just come up with
it's good to know that, these are linguistic theories, or these are, nice to know. But also...
Well, it's, you could say a hobby for smart people, or maybe just autists, but whatever. Like...
I mean, I guess... But also, I mean, I feel like that's just so... Isn't that depressing? Like, then what's the point?
Well, the point would be to come up with something that's testable that you could then attempt to enact, right? I mean, like, well, that's the point of real science. Okay, so pure research is just this is something we don't know. Let's see if we can come up with something. And then you don't know why you're going there until you get there, and that's like part of like you could say an evolutionary process. Well, this is Kuhn's kind of argument. Like we just bumble around until we find some things, and then it all looks like it was progressive and whatever. And to some extent, it was. It all looks like it was pre-planned, predetermined, following some kind of a path towards growth in terms of information, but really it was just an evolutionary process of getting rid of stupid ideas, but enough ants going into the room to try to find the sugar.
Doesn't
eventually
PewDiePie alone disprove your theory?
Oh, which theory?
That philosophy isn't enacted.
Well, no, because like for one thing, he's got very Okay, so this is why I'm trying to make a disprove what theory? Like because I'm saying demarcation is. Is that philosophy would be the pure exploration, and theology would be pure exploration.
I know, but you were talking about like a transcendent like self-improvement. Mm-hmm. And isn't that what he did via philosophy?
Yes, and that would be the application, which I would say is counseling, because he's doing psychology now. I mean, he's doing counseling. If you're doing it as a practice, if you're doing it for yourself, self-help or whatever. I mean, like it would be a transformative process. So that would move in toward and this would also be a question about how religion. Okay, since I haven't even fully demarcated yet, but the point would be that would be a reason why counseling has ended up taking over the religious space in a secular sense, because it's the transformative process. So therefore, it is necessarily a religious process.
But he was reading.
It's not theological.
But he was reading these books of philosophy and able to extract and apply and thus transform himself.
Okay.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
So how was that not transformative?
But that's not because he didn't have to. Okay, because he did not have to understand. Because he could have been certain friends of ours who read and don't understand. They have eyes to see but do not, or ears to hear and do not, whatever. Yeah. I'm not great at the quick quotes, but because you can recognize something left hemispherically and you can understand what the logical process is. You can have the pure philosophy and then not be able to enact. You can have, like, I can tell my clients this is why you're doing this behavior, but unless I get it over to the gestaltic experiential part in which they're going to be motivated to enact whatever that concept is, it's not moving. They're not going to change. They're just going to kick themselves for like, well, I know I'm doing this stupid thing, but I guess I can't help it, And that's what I would say is the craft of counseling, is to move that psychoeducational piece into the enacted piece.
So you're saying that his transformation wasn't based on the fact that he was reading philosophy?
No.
It was some
his personal commitment ahead of time. His approach to the text as a religious, and because I can read some religious text that I don't have any affiliation for. Okay. I was going to pick this one, but then I'm like, maybe pick one for this example. Maybe we'll leave that off of video. But if I could pick a religious affiliation that I don't have any affiliation for, I'm going to approach that text differently than if I think it's the Word of God, right? And that is what also makes the text religious, because I'm saying my failure to understand the Bible is my failure, right? That's what makes that a religious text. That's what makes my approach to the text religious. Is I recognize I have to transform myself in order to understand and to interact with this text, with God, with whatever. The person has to be. If I think this is just Scientology, I'm okay bashing that one. If I just pick Scientology, I don't have any expectation of this text as I may find it has some interesting ideas, but I'll pull that into my pre-existing conceptualizations. I'm not going to approach that as a religious text that has the potential to transform me in some way on its own. Okay. See what I'm saying? Yeah. So he approached the text from a religious attitude. But I guess there's a point here, because I'm looking for, you've gone off on a tangent that's really helpful, because, that's how the positive spin thing, that's me being a counselor. No, the point though is, it is really helpful because.
You didn't fool me at all.
Oh, darn it. Well, it didn't help that I actually announced that. It's whatever. Okay. But I was not attempting to get to that question of what PewDiePie was doing. I'm not attempting to ask questions about what the religion inherent does. Nor am I attempting to evangelize, which is the question that we had in the last group. And like, essentially, you come to evangelize a position, which is to engage in a transformative experience. Yeah. Whereas the group is intended as an educational experience, you transform yourself. Yeah. Like, and that's kind of, and that's the difference in pastoring. And I don't want to be a pastor too, so I don't even want to engage in that evangelistic role. I mean, I would approach that with fear and trembling, shall we say. So, which is interesting because I don't mind engaging in a transformative role in counseling, but also I'm trained at that, you know? So I know what I'm doing there. I don't know what I would be doing if I was trying to step into or step on the toes of a pastor. You know, I don't feel like I would do well at it. It's not my role in the body, per se, right? So if I'm going to enact my role, I need to know what my role is and what demarcates that. But you have a good point, because the activities that I'm articulating here, theology, philosophy, psychology, pastoring, and counseling, are all professional crafts, let's say. They all rely on the subjectivity of the person that's being addressed, right? And the individual reader of the philosophy text, the theological adherent, what do you call somebody a pastor over? The sheep. Let's go with the sheep. And then the psychological client or something. Yeah. So that is a question, because there's going to be, this is only the craft. This is not the experience. This is not the end result. Yeah, because the end result is essentially, since I like free will, is essentially in the hands of the person who's making a commitment to religious transformation. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, so that was helpful, because that it does keep me from it allows us to demarcate what's not a part of this conversation, which is the religious adherence approach, mm-hmm. right? So it's not that subjective question. It's the approach of the crafts themselves, and how the pastor doesn't say, to some borderline woman who's freaking out and breaking stuff and whatever, you just need to pray it away and you're sinning or whatever, because, that's not going to be effective.
Sure.
I mean, okay, maybe it can. This is also how I have a difficulty expressing this too, because I do believe in like religious transformative experience.
Yeah.
So I want to leave myself open to that, but also practically, I certainly hear more stories of like, this pastor just told me to pray it away and that didn't help at all, and now I'm just giving up on religion entirely, because they were, making things up. They were just essentially making things up, and assuming that things were religious when they weren't. It would be my take. And then that becomes a theological question.
So what you're saying is that you're strictly focusing on the, I don't even have the word for it, but the philosopher, the counselor, the
craft.
Yes, okay.
The enactor of the craft or whatever.
Yes.
The artist.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Rather than the receiver.
Right.
Of the
yeah.
Whatever. Though I feel like when you are talking about a transformative experience, obviously there is a degree of responsibility, obviously, in the audience.
Oh, okay, yeah, of course. Then that would go to the free will thing. Yeah. But it occurred to me that I think another good formation to separate those questions is, I'm looking for the Aristotelian habits of virtue that would be appropriate for each one of these tasks as a profession.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for. I want to be able to say, possibly because I really have difficulty respecting theology at all, and I know that that's wrong. So I am willing to say, I know that there's a function in the body for theology people and theology professors, and I happen to respect several of them a lot.
Yeah.
But I have difficulty respecting the profession, because I feel like all it does is create fights that are meaningless and transform people in the wrong way, right? And don't actually enact the virtues that are intended. But also I feel like there is a necessity to bring coherence to our understanding of the text.
Did you even say how you would demarcate theology from
philosophy?
Yeah, well, I feel like that. I mean, I know what did you say? But then from pastoring.
Because one would be in the same way that I would psychology from counseling.
Yeah.
I mean, I can have psychology textbooks and say this is what happens when this is the ash line experiment. This and I do this a lot when I start talking about split brain patients or whatever, and then I'll talk about the different ways that we have operating systems in our brain that kind of contradict each other, and they have to be made to work together so that the person has a unified integrity. And I'll talk about the Iowa gambling task. I mean, so anyway, but the point being that I'll give an illustration of this psychological material, which is really just a version of attempting to understand how the world works. So I would say that's almost pure science, but not really. Some of the experiments were just let's see what happens when we do this, and especially before they had the ethics developed, the results were much more interesting. But turns out that you throw a bunch of psychopaths naked into a room and feed them through straws in the wall, it doesn't actually change them from being psychopaths. Just FYI. But anyhow, the 70s were a great time. And give them hallucinogens, I think is what they tried to do. But anyhow, but some of that research, it's we don't know what's going to happen. Let's just try it out. And if you stumble upon some effect that's not explained, in some way, and then I think EMDR was kind of birthed that way, and it essentially had the Aristotelian recognition of an effect, and then tried to create a pretty incoherent description of why that effect was effective. And then over the years has been, stealing from other fields and other theorists, but generally making themselves more coherent. So now EMDR is, if practiced correctly, which is another thing, because the practice of EMDR is iffy. Yeah. But if the practitioner does what they're supposed to be doing, then it's very effective.
With the right person.
But that would be part of what the practitioner is supposed to be doing, making sure you're practicing it on the person that's appropriate for it, right? So the selective thing, whatever. But the point being, I feel like there's something to be said for that ground up, experiential kind of philosophizing, I should say. But you just have to go experiment. So it's again the million ants going into a room. Eventually, one of them finds the sugar, and then all of them find the sugar because you're having a lot of failed experiments. So you're saying what isn't the case? It isn't the case if we go this way, that way, that way, or that way. But this one, I have a reward there, so then everybody goes that way, which is Kuhn's description of science, and again, I would say an analog version of artificial intelligence, but based on some kind of evolutionary process, like evolution in terms of iterative process. So anyway, I don't know if I just wandered off on a tangent. Was that a tangent?
That was a major tangent.
Sorry. Oh.
So I think I asked how you would demarcate theology from pastoring.
Demarcate theology from pastoring. Oh, because one's enacted and one's the pure research.
Yeah.
And we need some people that are autistic and obsessed with pure research. And not that they're, I think they're less autistic than theology, but there are probably some.
But pastors can use theology.
Of course. And counselors will use, but the intention of counseling and pastoring is to guide someone to make the path towards transformation as easy as possible, or maybe not. Maybe as clear as possible. To make the transformative path as clear as possible. Go ahead.
No. Well, this is what I was thinking when you said that you don't have respect for theology.
I try to. I want to. I really want to have. Go ahead.
But if it's... Well, no, this is a separate thought. I'll go with that one. And then you were saying that you didn't see the distinction between philosophy and theology.
Oh, no. Well, that was the question. Now, I would say now, in that, there's a separate question, because theology is using the approach to something that is the source of that yes or no question, like I was saying with the ants. That wasn't entirely right, but the point is, the text is the rejection or assumption. Obviously, we still have our subjectivity that we bring to the text, and I feel like that's often a failure of the process. Like a Derrida would point, as Rorty would point out too, in terms of the reality of the interpretation of the text is whatever your peers allow you to get away with saying. And I'm of course adding to his quote, but yeah, the Richard Rorty thing, I feel like that's the case of a lot of doctrinal debate is more sociological than anything. But in terms of the idea being, philosophy and psychology are at best, well, okay, the Platonic philosophy is going to go with, and I'm using Kant to say synthetic a prioris. Does that sound like I'm using that right? I feel like I'm using anyway, whatever.
Well, I don't know.
But I'm saying like the idea of like pure thought that then relates to itself, and then we create a system of interrelated thoughts that just reflect themselves and have not been enacted or tried down. So I'm mixing what I would say is contemplative, but I feel like it works. Anyway, versus Aristotelian, start at the ground, test these things, but then the testing ground for the theological is both to some extent. Is the testing ground rather than reality would be the text, and or maybe the experiential to some degree, or the direct revelation, which is also a wide open question, or the Orthodox or Catholic, you're going to say the traditional continued revelation, or something along those lines. So I'm not saying that I can solve the problem of theology either, obviously, but I feel like the demarcation would be limiting it to questions of individual transformation rather than reality. And then philosophy would be things talking about reality or metaphysics, not necessarily about personal transformation, which would then subsume or be parent in the tree of psychology, which would be testable ways in which we can create transformation. So I mean, it's going to go around in a circle, but then untestable ways of creating transformation, which would be all the existential, all the revelatory, all the road to Damascus kinds of events. It would be David Wood, frickin' psychopath, like having a fasting battle with a Christian, and then has a transformative experience where he's still a psychopath, but he's a new creature because he's just not peeling people's skin off or something.
But can you ever get to the transformative, revelatory without the research, without the? I mean, isn't that?
Of course, this is why Forrest Gump thing. Is that where I'm going with that, right? No, okay, because I've said we've had this discussion before, but I think especially both in counseling, but I think probably both in counseling, maybe equally in counseling as well as pastoring as craft too. We have to have a recognition of the limitation of the things that we spend all of our time working on. I mean, some things just happen, but which would be God's interacting miraculous, or psychologically it could just be like, hey, that person really didn't.
Well, sure, but then that's when you end up with we'll just pray. Or,
right,
or
exactly.
we'll just
there has
do
to
this
be
thing that happened experientially this one time, and
then the follow up, the reason I mentioned Forrest though was that we have to have a recognition that of our own finitude, right? We are not God, and my concern is that theology ends up getting people's thoughts confused with God's thoughts, obviously. And this is why I would never want to be a pastor, though, because I don't want to get my thoughts confused with, my attempts at transformative experience confused with God's attempts, which I may have not any clue about, other than my personal existential faith. But anyway, the point of Forrest Gump, though, is I love that as a movie because you have the demonstration of an idiot who is also of high moral character and a person worth emulating. In a broad sense, right? I mean, he's got Aristotelian virtues, and he's got compassion and whatever. He just has no idea what's going on in the world.
Sure.
And it's not and this is just so important. This is also what strikes me in my response to theology. It's so important to recognize that intelligence, and also philosophy too, is not a prerequisite for a good life. I mean, it really isn't.
Yeah.
And also, it can freaking get completely in the way. At least the value that the benefit it has to be Forrest Gump is that you have the expectation that somebody can figure out a problem somewhere. Well, if there's some problem there, then somebody has got that figured out, and it'll be fine. I'll just go ask someone, because you're not thinking of problems that are complex enough for that to not be the case. once you have high IQ people engaging in philosophy, or, once 100 years ago, when you had high IQ people engaging in meaningful philosophy and not mere gibberish, then they could develop problems that they were unable to solve. And reasonably so, because anybody of any intelligence level is going to be able to think of problems that they are beyond their ability to manage, right? The problem is the highest level of IQ no longer has anybody else to say, well, somebody can figure that out, because it's like, no, that's your job, dude, or it's not going to get done. And at that point, they're like, well, no, it must just be reality that's broken, not my finitude that then can no longer understand either philosophy or God. And I think this becomes the challenge that theologists will then assume that they can, from the text, derive everything they need to know about God, which is not, it's like they haven't read Job or something. And it's also not the point. Like, the nature of pastoring is transformative experience again, not. See, this is my question, but I don't know how much to put on doctrinal education either. Like, what do you? It's a whole series of questions that I have. They're all somewhat interrelated, but mostly I want to start with, and this is what I'm hoping I have just at least pieced together, is what's the difference between these groups? Because I don't want to step on, as a counselor, I don't really want to step on the toes. Okay, well, there are no philosophers to step on the toes of anymore, so I'm fine taking that role. But I don't want to step on the toes of theologists and pastors to the extent that that's not my gig. I mean, it's literally not.
Well, okay, so if a counselor and a pastor both...
Walk into a bar. Sorry, I couldn't.
Or what?
Walk into a bar.
Yeah.
It's a perfect setup for a joke. Okay, go ahead.
If the goal is both transformative experience, what's the difference there? Other than secular, if you have a Christian counselor and a pastor...
Yeah. Because one, I say there's a tremendous difference in the fact that I actually have a faith belief, so I actually think one would be interacting with an actual God. So that's a huge difference, but in terms of but that's a priori belief problem.
No.
You were asking.
I was asking what...
I probably still do.
No, I can't see you with the thing. Okay. I was asking what the difference is.
Is that still good?
Yeah.
Okay.
What the difference is between a Christian counselor and a pastor. If you're saying the primary feature is transformation.
If you're saying a counselor that's a Christian versus a Christian counselor.
No, a Christian counselor.
Yeah.
And a pastor.
Yeah, I think if you're a Christian counselor, you're doing both badly. And that's the definition of a Christian counselor, is someone who can't do either job.
Okay.
At all.
Okay.
Not even well, at all.
Okay.
Just FYI. Because the nature of the Aristotelian approach to counseling is one in which reality must reject your lack of skill, therefore you iterate new instances and evolve new skills and improve what you're doing, improve your craft. They're robbed of that possibility by being able to essentially blame everything on metaphysical, spiritual forces, like, you just didn't pray enough. Okay. Which, it's fine if you're a pastor. So this is it. But I think it's a perfect question at demarcation. Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because if you're a pastor and that's where you're going to go, I think that's the point, because that's what you should be doing. But if you're actually talking about medical issues, or is ADHD real or something, those kind of questions are not have actual answers, and it's not just a metaphysical.
But
and of course they can have miracles. I'm not discounting that either. But the definition of miracle is something that doesn't freaking happen much.
But there must be some Christian counselors that are not solely reliant on...
Well, that's what I would say. I know several counselors that are Christians.
Yeah, that
are... They call themselves Christian counselors. That I would say are good.
That will incorporate, religion if...
Well, I'll incorporate religion, certainly, if I have a... But also, I feel like it's part of my ethical responsibility as a counselor not to, to make sure that I'm getting informed consent about any kind of thing, and I take that very seriously in the sense of if they start wandering off, then I'm going to let them wander off, and that's not exactly the opposite role of a pastor, not trying to pastor them back to religion.
So what about these, like, because you can get certified as like a certified, I mean, I don't know what
Are you
it
just
is.
trying to provoke me? Is that the...
like you could be a, I don't know what it is. I mean, and I'm
It's
sure
awful,
you know,
that's what it is,
like
yeah.
a certified Christian counselor.
Man, you're just like...
like,
Have I not talked to you about that before?
no, yeah, of course you have. I've seen the...
Are you just provoking me so that on video I will, like, absolutely trash these things?
Well, yeah, I mean,
That's so wrong. That's not the point. That's not why we're...
You come over here and you
Well,
put me
okay,
on camera.
so there is a point to what you're saying, and I think there's a kernel to rescue there that is actually the point, which is demarcation, because
yes,
the certification test for that Christian counseling or whatever is absurd philosophically.
yes,
It is wildly absurd, and they don't recognize the preconceptions and the philosophic foundations that they're operating on when they ask the questions in the first place.
Yes.
So then their questions are actually nonsense, and they think it's not even scripture. They think it's like divinely inspired, and it has nothing. It's poor theology and it's poor counseling, and just across the board, it's just neither.
Okay.
And so but that's a good point, because that is exactly what I would say about an iatrogenic problem or a psychologenic problem, right? Like or would you theologenic problem? Like it's actually it's both. That is the worst of every world, actually, because that's I would say there are theologenic problems, like the problem of free will and predestination. Let's have another fight about that, when I think that's a philosophic question. It has nothing to do with theology. They should just leave it alone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then if you cause church splits and you cause people to get into giant arguments about this stuff, then you as a theologist are creating divisions that are transformative, that are the opposite of pastoring.
Yeah.
But also, if you're trying to add again, psychology as a subheading of philosophy, you're trying to transform people in ways that they don't, by scientific process, actually transform, like by testable, researchable interventions. Then it's like the what do you call the gay transformative thing?
Conversion?
Yeah, conversion therapy thing. I mean, like, this is not going to work, it's never going to work, and it's ridiculous. And that has nothing to do with either the philosophic or the religious, that has nothing to do with anything other than there's no science allowed. Like, you're not allowed to research how to transition someone's sexuality, therefore there won't be any. Therefore, if there are interventions that would allow somebody to transform from gay to straight, or whatever you want to call that process, we are never going to discover them because we're not allowed to research it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be agnostic as to the possibility of that, but I'm going to say that I'm going to affirm that it's not going to happen. It's going to continue to essentially injure people in both ways, because the philosophic secular community won't allow it to be tested, and the religious community is going to make assumptions that are essentially scientific assumptions. And so that's nobody staying in their lane. But anyway, I forgot where you did the Christian counseling thing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the worst. That's the worst of both. It's a poorly applied theology and poorly applied philosophy, and so that's kind of an interesting conundrum all by itself.
Well, then I feel like science, and as you're talking, I feel like science is almost another one that I feel like that's a lot easier to demarcate, but I feel like even with the way that some people treat philosophy, I feel like it bleeds.
What do you mean?
Oh, you don't think?
I don't know if I get what you're saying.
You don't feel like science,
and maybe I was just getting distracted, like.
You don't think that science has a tendency to bleed into philosophy or psychology?
No, okay. I actually heard you. No, I didn't. I still don't understand. Like, if you're saying
as a field,
if you're saying are you saying in a way that is circular?
Yes.
Okay, because now I can understand the question in that it's feeding itself, right?
Yeah.
But I would say it's the same pursuit. It should be the same. The scientific and the philosophic should be the same pursuit. I mean, this is why science came out of philosophy in the first place. Like, let's see how things work, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose. So you don't feel like there's a need to differentiate?
What's your concern? What's your, because it
I mean,
sounds like you have a...
No, it's not a concern.
It sounds like you have a soapbox you want to jump on.
No, I don't have a soapbox. But you don't feel like there's a need to differentiate the two?
Science and philosophy. Well, because I don't epistemologically privilege science, so why do I care?
Okay.
I mean, like, I feel like that solves that problem. Like, if you engage in philosophy of science and give it some kind of specials.
I suppose.
If you make Dr. Fauci candles, then no. Yeah, that's a problem. But that's also moving to faith. That's no longer. That's just a different theology. That's no longer, I would say, the proper field of philosophy or science.
You see, I would argue that it is privilege. You don't think so?
How? What do you mean? And specifically defining that in case there's an audience. Yeah, you're saying that that things that are called science should have a specific set of criteria, because this is typically when you talk about the demarcation problem in science, it's like what makes something science, and therefore science is necessarily better than every other way of thinking. And obviously that bursts the field of philosophy of science as a sub-discipline or whatever, and Karl Popper and whatever other folks. Okay, so that's not what you're saying?
No, I'm saying, well, I'll have to think more on what I'm saying, just to properly articulate it, but it's fine. Okay. I just feel like it's been given more privilege than it should.
Oh, well, yeah. No, absolutely. No, if you're talking about, okay, so I'm creating a Platonic ideal of what position, science should fit in and how this should work in terms of a tree. In terms of an actuality, no, everybody's going to worship scientists as if they are the prophets and magicians of the age, because they essentially are. I mean, like, nobody can make a toaster. You can't make a freaking toaster. And like, did you see the guy trying to make the toaster? Yeah. Like,
parts,
yeah, you can't do stuff that is fairly simplistic and easily accessible. So obviously it's magic, and so we should trust the magicians of our age.
Yeah.
If that's what you're saying. So that's the actuality, but that's not the Platonic ideal.
Yeah.
Although I hate Plato, but it's whatever. That is essentially what I'm doing, is creating like a specific Platonic idealism for the application of these fields.
Yeah.
But
that's so okay. That's ironic.
Yes, it is, isn't it? I just realized that as you asked the question. So yay. But I think it should. Well, to the extent that it stays within the question. The reason that I am is because of Christian counselors.
Okay, so you're trying to save it right now.
Yes, I absolutely am. And I'm just going to completely make this up ad hoc and just like do whatever kind of justifications I need to get myself away from Platonism. Okay. But no, actually, I think that is the point. That is the problems that I have seen enacted in individuals. The guy that comes to me that's had all the conversion therapy that doesn't work and is just miserable, more miserable than whatever he would if he just chose to be, okay, I'm going to be gay and celibate forever, and he's like actually happier with that than like trying to not be gay. That kind of that which is of course his choice, not my because I don't, just in case this is I'm not touching that one. He's doing him. I mean, that's actually my motto that's on my wall. You do you. I don't care what you do, just do it on purpose. Anyway, but the point is, like, having seen so many poorly enacted instances, I'm trying to say where do we start? What can we reject in terms of approach based on evidence such as really poor Christian counselors, right? Or theologic problems that create church divisions and fights when they're not even in no way necessarily applied in daily life.
Sure. Like,
I mean, there's a difference if you're going to say immersion baptism versus, sprinkling or something. At least you can see somebody enacting that.
Yeah. Whether
or not we have predestination, and like, who cares? That is the definition of an irrelevant problem. So, I mean, like, and a lot of philosophies like that too. And this is why I was saying I think there is a place for pure exploration or pure science or whatever you want to call it. But those questions have to be minimalized in terms of the importance we place on them, and as we triage the various concerns of either Christianity, counseling, philosophy, or whatever, the things that have the least amount of enacted value have to be least important. So, and again, I go back to Forrest Gump as the ideal. Forrest.
Okay. All right. So, do you have your characteristics of each? Your totally non-Platonic.
Non-Platonic. You're right, though. I really should, in terms of my epistemological model, should frame these all in the negative, right? I mean, that would be the way to make it Aristotelian.
That's
broadly,
that's what you need
broadly
to do.
Platonic. That's what you got to do. But see, this really is not just justification, but
no, actually, what you're doing is you're observing what you
the
are
problems
seeing.
and trying to the observation, and this is what I can observe
you're
too.
Observing, you're observing reality, and then
I don't want to make assumptions, religious assumptions based on counseling experience either, and try to apply those to the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
This would be more my concern, that I have a very specific practical and evidence, not just evidence-based in terms of research, but also in terms of anecdotal experience, transformative experiences from my clients, model of how to go about addressing things. That is somewhat contra a model of direct, revelation and or miracles, and since we can't just immediately call miracles from heaven with any regularity. I feel like I'm pretty safe ground saying that. Then there has to be a certain amount of just like, how do you fix the oven or something? The very practical kinds of like, this is how you do it. And so when you ask some psychological questions, yes, they are just about that. Like, how do you treat a borderline? Well, it's not just prayed away. It's like, there's 3 treatment models that we can use to address these things. How do you respond to trauma or whatever? And like there are actual realities that we interact with, which may not have a statistical certainty, but at least reduce your, the amount of error to a minimal, Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answered that, but that's part of the what I'm saying.
But also what you're writing, these are shoulds. These aren't reality.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is what you're describing. Counseling should be a transformative experience.
Well, if the person doesn't suck, right. But this is also what I'm saying. I want to just establish the Aristotelian virtues that we should be striving for. What is your ideal? Are you smelling something burning?
I was wondering what you were doing.
Are we going?
Yep.
Okay, so before I thought I was catching fire. I don't know what that was, but anyway. Maybe it's just the heat, actually, now I think about it. So to try to demarcate let's just say there's some negatives that we can say for those crafts that are intending to create transformative experience. So both pastors and counselors should not be basing what they're transforming the person onto into based on their own whims or based on their personal projection or let's see if I wrote something else. Not create other people in their own image, mm-hmm. right? The counselor should be trying to help the person create themselves in the image that they want or potentially can. So that's mm-hmm. why informed consent is the point. Mm-hmm. Like you try, whatever you want to try to make you out of yourself towards some less injured, or what's the word? Self-injurious. That's really I think injured because I do so many trauma people.
Towards some goal that they have.
Maladaptive is probably something more like I want, but so towards something that's less
healthier version.
Let's go with self-injurious because I think that's what a lot of it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean cutting or something. It's just
But in pastoring, it may have nothing to do with that.
Right. No, it's not because, well, you're trying to so counseling has some ideal of the person this is why my business is called integrity. I mean, like, counseling has the idea of being able to integrate the person and make their values, desires, and themselves in the world into something that's not painful / malformed. And then the way that is defined is given to the client. I mean, that's the ethical commitment of the profession. Also, I think that's an ethical commitment to free will, so that's another question of mine. Or, anyway, whatever. But pastoring, obviously, is the intention to, direct people to God and to whatever formation that the particular denomination or belief system has of what is a human being, which is also why I think actual counselors who are Christians rather than Christian counseling should be the thing. Like, you have the potential to describe what a human being is supposed to be, and they don't do that. They don't, like at Liberty or whatever, when there is no attempt to do a Christian philosophy of counseling, which I think is absurd. Like, the normative psychology has always been kind of the standard, like, what's normal? How do normal people respond to things? And that's kind of gone out the window towards a lot of more shoulds than it used to be. And I guess Albert Ellis is rolling in his grave. I guess he's dead now, think about it. Anyway, Kent Anker's guy, maybe he never died. But the, what? No. Just like his voice is just great. Like, you shouldn't should all over yourself. Should is the word there. Anyway, but his voice is great. But the point there though is my ADD. Is like, not even, no idea what I was talking about.
Normative.
I was just normative counseling, right? But we have replaced with a lot more shoulds based on what we can say in terms of like consequences of CBT or something that's been tested and shown to result in X thing, which basically everybody thinks is a good idea. Obviously, then there's more moralizing and more influence of secular ideas, and then more of a prescriptive. This is what people should be like, You should have good self-esteem, even if you're, a psychopath or something like that's. It's bizarrely acontextual, but that's another point. The idea though is from a faith-based position, one should have an actual ability to come up with actual shoulds. If you're saying that this text is the revelatory description of human perfection, meaning Jesus. But they don't like they have sadly backed away from any kind of prescription, or even the formation. Like I find it like disheartening again, and this is the argument that I always make every time that it comes up. Is like, I don't know why there's no Christian philosophy at Liberty, because somebody should have gone up there and it's like, we're going to give up this entire field to secularism. Just like nobody's going to go be missionaries to the field of philosophy, and then also we are not going to even have I believe the faith in our own convictions about the reality of the Bible to attempt to describe okay, so this goes into the problem of Christian counselors though, too, because then they don't, I guess that's where that falls apart, is because they don't have the philosophy in order to create that kind of model in a way that's coherent.
Yeah. It
just becomes nonsense. So never mind. They do that all the time, and it's just wildly, from an outside observer, it's just wildly naive. So.
Well, and this is a little bit of a tangent, and maybe
I'll never take a tangent. No tangents.
As a personal tangent.
Okay.
So maybe we can
edit later. Okay.
Yeah, but I was just, when I had asked a philosophy professor
who shall remain unnamed and was threatened by PewDiePie,
a question about Christian, like if he could name Christian philosophers.
Right.
And the question was...
He didn't name McIntyre, did he?
Well, I had said besides McIntyre.
Did he know McIntyre?
I mean, I assume.
Okay. Or
But
planting God. I'm just kind of curious.
he didn't-
I'm curious who knows. I mean, like, there's...
He didn't say,
Okay,
but
go ahead.
but the response was initially, do you mean philosophers who also just happen to be Christian?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, there's clearly like a...
You would assume that there would be a crossover.
Well, yeah, but it's like, oh, you mean they just kind of happen to be both rather than their philosophy is Christian.
Sure.
And so I had to clarify, like, no, like Christian philosophy.
Yeah.
And so then he gave me a list. And so then I was like, oh, did you Google this? And he's like, yes, I did. Like,
Well, at least he was honest about it.
Yeah. So he wasn't familiar with any practicing Christian philosophers, which I thought was...
Well, yeah, nobody's making a
fascinating.
defense of it at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, even, you know, someone...
I like, just, again, in the field of personal tangents, is like, is he a reliable source to survey for his profession? I feel like he doesn't know much.
Well, no.
But I mean, I just feel like the field is sad.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like part of that is...
The field is ripe for revolution in the
age is probably part of it.
Oh, yeah.
And also, like, I think he's just kind of checked out. But this is...
Yeah. But I would definitely say I feel like the field of philosophy is ripe for revolution in the Kuhnian sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like because it's just so stiltified, so it's just sad. So
No, there's not much.
yeah, and so then why not have like Christian philosophers that just take over?
Yeah.
Oh, because we're not making any. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say I feel like this is why, and as we've talked about, why Jordan Peterson has become...
Yeah, he gets sucked into.
force.
Yeah, he is the only Christian philosopher. And is
He's
he
like
Christian?
not a Christian.
I don't even know. I mean, like,
But yeah, like he's...
if he is, he's not the most courageous.
Mm,
So anyway,
but...
yeah. So that would be the... You know, I guess were we just back to where we were?
Yeah.
Because I was going to say that would be the negatives for the transformative professions. Let's say.
Okay.
The question of, and this is the question I really want, and was kicking around, that I really want a good, clear picture of. What does it mean to be a mature Christian? And that's necessarily a theological question.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't think so. Why would you think that's a theological question?
It must necessarily, I mean, just in the broadest terms. So let's pick the most obvious, easiest to. Do I need to know the difference between mortal and venial sin? It's called venial, whatever.
Yeah.
It's another thing that I don't, you read and you don't, whatever. Do I need to know that?
Yeah.
I'm Protestant, so I don't give a crap.
Yeah.
Like that's.
But see, that would be theological. So why do you?
Exactly.
Yeah. So why do you?
So
think
the question would be as in the pastoring or priesting, that would be a transformative process for someone committed to that particular theology.
I know, but you're asking
engaging in that question, because that's going to be necessary for them to do.
But you're asking what it means to be a mature Christian, not what it means to be a mature pastor, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So isn't that just one's personal relationship with God?
In the Kierkegaardian sense, yeah, certainly. And in the Abrahamic sense, certainly.
I mean...
Well, I was picking Fear and Trembling when Kierkegaard references Abraham, so that was my thought process there. But I'm not sure where you're going with that, because I'm saying that the description of what you would say is a relationship is going to be focused differently, or mature is going to be what are you trying to mature into? There is of course there is of course an objective standard, and God knows that we don't, and then we have to try to make a coherent belief system that describes this objective standard, which is the function of theology, and then the application of that theology is going to be pastoring, but it's going to be different pastoring, whether it's Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant.
Well, if we also subscribe to the fact that, okay, the Bible is written by man, how many translations has it undergone? Sheesh. Like, do you think that God cares if you know the difference between those things? I mean, or would he be more impressed with enacted values?
But you're obviously speaking from your Protestantism,
Yeah. Okay. You're right.
right?
Yeah.
So your definition of mature Christians, obviously, you're just showing me now, like your description is different than a mature Catholic.
Yes, you are right. So.
Yeah, but so I think it necessarily becomes a theological question, right? And so
Okay.
there is a necessary role for theology, despite my concerns about it.
Okay, so.
But I still don't know what that, because I still want to allow Forrest Gump into the highest levels of religious maturity were he a religious person. I mean, like, some version of him as a Christian, you know?
So.
Because he's fictitious, obviously. You know that nonfiction story biography of that guy? I saw him with the JFK or whatever it was.
But no, I mean, I guess you're right. What it means to be a mature Christian will vary depending on denomination.
What one is attempting to mature into, or what one's interpretation of what God wants. And this is why I when Reed asked, I wanted to define, I was trying to be very careful in my definition of theology, and I don't know if that would have been anything that a theologist would have agreed with, but my definition of theology would be man's attempt to come up with a coherent way to approach the text, which would, I think I actually said it better whenever I said it live. But I want to make it, the primary distinction I want to make there is between the text, which is itself coherent, versus our attempt to make a coherent construct from the text, which is human activity versus divine activity.
Yeah.
I forgot where we're going with that. But this is, I would say, the function of theology is because there are going to be some questions there about what is the mature thing. Now, the more it gets towards what I would say is pure science, the less value I think it has, and the more I think it's going to tend towards theologenic problems. You know, the more obscure it gets in terms of non-applicability, the necessary less value it should have, which is, of course, the Christological response to theology generally, is that everything, but not, of course, not everybody subscribes to that, and of course that wasn't, you know, but the idea is like having everything referenced back to Christ. At least you have some kind of practically enacted example of whatever you're trying to develop theologically. What?
Sorry.
Oh, I'm rubbing the furry. I can't help it. I don't even know if that is that on camera. Like, you guys think you're rubbing the furry? Okay, it's very soft.
Sorry.
What is?
No, I'm getting distracted. It's fine.
Yeah. You see what I was saying there? Well, okay, yeah. So I can identify when theology goes awry. I can identify when pastoring and counseling go awry, and I think we can identify philosophy and psychology.
You haven't talked about
that one.
Yeah.
Although, actually, I already have, because I have said that about highly intelligent people coming up with problems and assuming that that's a problem with the universe, which is the entire postmodern condition, is some assumption of human infallibility, and then when we have a recognition, not infallibility, is a lack of recognition of our finitude, let's say, and then that arrogance being blamed on reality, which one could say is essentially the Job question too. Is essentially like, I don't understand, therefore it can't be understood. I don't understand, therefore it must be God's fault. I don't understand, therefore the nature of language is impossible to manage, or something. Like, it's not taking responsibility for our own shortcomings and blaming that instead on the thing itself.
So that's for
philosophy specifically.
Okay.
But, well, let's think about that in terms of psychology. I think the projection question is going to be more the problem for psychology. I mean, it's definitely the problem for bad counselors. I mean, like, this is how I end up losing respect for so many counselors. So they just, enact their own personal family, whatever.
But then that overlaps with.
You should talk to your mother again. It doesn't matter if she's a sociopath.
But then.
Or whatever. Or like, how do you kick somebody out of the family and whatnot? We shouldn't do that. But no, that's your issues. You don't know what's going on in the family, and maybe that's the best possible decision for everybody.
Yeah. But then you're overlapping with counseling, psychology and counseling.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? The biggest actual problem with psychology at the moment is just what I was saying about it's DSM-3 in the 1980s, where they...
Is it too politically correct? Is that...
It wasn't... that was not the conceptualization of things in the 80s, but that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, the removal of masochistic and sadistic personality disorders, and homosexuality, and what else was thrown out of the... So these are no longer things we can diagnose people with, not based on any research, but just because of a vote.
Well,
But psychopaths, I mean, then that's the big one from DSM-3, is they throw out psychopaths. And that's more testable, there's more neurological evidence for the existence of psychopaths than there is basically anything else in the stupid book.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have DSM-5, and you've got all these disorders, and then you lump together the neurological observable description of psychopaths with antisocial personality, under the umbrella of antisocial personality disorder. So you just have some guys that grew up in a tough neighborhood, like having to survive, and didn't have the moral development, like more Lawrence Kohlberg kind of conceptualization. Like they're still operating on the lower levels of moral development, but they could advance if they were given the right nature, the right motivation, whatever. You lump that together with folks who are psychopaths and actually are neurologically different. I won't say they can't change. I mean, like, there's no treatment process for them to change, but you have David Wood, who's freaking still a psychopath, but he's ethical and religious now. Yeah. But you can tell, you listen to him, and like, his brain is not like normal brains. He's still got a psychopath brain. He's just acting ethically, not peeling people's skin off or something. Yeah. So, and that's, again, I would credit that to a miraculous intervention. There's nothing humans can do to create that. In this one instance, that's what you got. It's absolutely wild. But anyway, my point was the attempt. There you go. The attempt of psychology to recreate humans in their own image is really what's going on there. We don't like the idea that someone could have a masochistic personality disorder or sadistic personality disorder, or whatever. It's inconvenient for societal, because I told you why they got rid of those, because they didn't want somebody to go in court and say, like, she has masochistic personality disorder, she deserved it, you can't blame me for beating her up or something. And so that's fair enough, but they should have just said that people have responsibility for their own behavior, rather than throw out what could possibly be an entirely justifiable disorder or complex. Just throw it out because it's inconvenient. Okay,
so the trans thing, is that in the DSM or no?
It's difficult to talk about it because the political landscape is such that you're going to have people enacting and making ethical complaints on things that are not actually the DSM. But basically, what you're trying to do is either gender affirmation or...
Well, I know you have to affirm, but is
it
in there?
But to go to, there's the dysphoric in there, the idea of having,
well, I know
feeling bad about it. But the point is, like,
body dysmorphia.
Yeah, sure. But you have, gender dysphoria, but... Oh,
gender dysphoria.
Yeah, but okay. To quote the critical drinker, like, so what's gender? Don't know. Like, it's but this is also the problem with a lot of, this is what Tim Pool constantly points out about the laws generally, like, the laws are socially determined, even if they're written in some way. You have to have people enforcing and interpreting them, and that's the postmodern, deconstructionist problem as well. So, if the society is enforcing it a different way, then it doesn't really matter what the text is anyhow. So, but if you're going back to the point here about creating man or psychology attempting to recreate, the idea isn't. Yeah, the normative psychology thing is a good point because we just want to make people like everyone else. So is that what people are supposed to be? Something Tower of Babel about that. But you remember the Dr. Rabbi Daniel Lapin who talked about the Tower of Babel, and again I quote him because I have no conceptualization, but he said like the text actually can be literally interpreted like the people were made into bricks because they're homogenized. So there could be a question about that, and I think there's something to be said about the individual uniqueness of each relationship with God, and each individual must have a creative contribution
but there's also,
as a part of the body. Go ahead.
But there's also something interesting to be said that, you know, as you're talking about the homogenization, but yet everyone has a diagnosis. So...
Not me? Oh wait, I'm ADD.
Should we count them? But
I have no. I am not like that. Or more like something burning me. Anyway, go ahead.
But so, and it's like trendy to have depression or anxiety or you know. So I don't know. It's almost just like a thing. Like, oh, I have this and you know.
Okay, so somebody watching the video may, interpret you correctly, but think that you're wrong, incorrectly. So there's an interesting thing about, and pick dissociative identity disorder as an example, which is fascinating because, of course, I've had 5 DID clients. That is trendy. That is literally, it's a trend. So it's not like, am I doing this to be cool? But it does come and go societally in waves, and those waves can be demonstrated over like a 200-year period. So there are phases in which people will present with certain disorders, and this is what I've said about having been in the field for 20-something years. Like in the 90s, you know, nobody, when I was working with teens in the 90s, everybody was oppositional defiant. You know, you had ADD and oppositional defiance. You still have ADD, but now you have high anxiety people hiding in there and having panic attacks. Like, I may have heard of one kid when I did 3 years of residential care for mostly teens. I think I had one kid that had a panic attack out of 500 that probably went through there in that course of time, right? Now it's like every third kid is having panic attacks, and nobody has oppositional defiant disorder. There is a trend that's in terms of what presents. There is still some I won't say nobody has it because I literally had a client referral the other day of somebody with oppositional defiant, but I think it's probably could be reactive attachment, but that's another. The point though is there are certain societal forces that end up shaping that end up misshaping people in certain ways. I would say. So the maladaptive behaviors are going to be contextual in terms of the the social contagion. There's the Korean, I think one of the first times they identified that was in the Korean suicides. Like one person did it, and then they broke out all over the place, and there hadn't been significant suicides before. I forget. This has been a long time since I read that, so I feel like this was in the 90s. But you do have definite social contagions that occur. So you can, especially when you identify those as maladaptive, say that that's essentially an infection or something going through the society in a way. And also back in the day, if somebody was cutting.
Oh yeah.
I was gonna say, but nobody, it was pretty rare. And then if somebody did it, you could always ask them, who did you see do that? And you could follow a string of this contagion from this person, this person, this person, and you could contain it even. When I was at the high school out here, I was a high school counselor for 1 year, and the school had like 2,500 students there. It's actually the high school that's here anyway. But we had that kind of break out at one point, and this one person started cutting. Who did you see? And we were able to actually contain and find it's a whole group of 5 people. And those are the only people that had ever seen anybody cut, and they were only experiencing each other. There wasn't the social availability of whatever. Now, freaking everybody cuts. It's everywhere. It's not just a social it's if somebody was going to pick a maladaptive behavior, they have plenty of examples of that to relate to, and then therefore they're going to pick it up.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, people didn't think about it.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting.
Yeah, no, that's really